Hey everyone, welcome back to our chapter book read-along of Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. Now, we are getting toward the end of this story, and I want to do a quick review before we get into our next chapters. Are you ready? So, we have four main characters, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. They are siblings who found a magical world called Narnia inside a wardrobe. Crazy. Well, they go on quite the adventure. Lucy finds Narnia first, and she meets a faun called Mr. Tumnus. He tells her all about Narnia and how it is always winter because the White Witch, who claims is the queen, is taking over, and she has made it winter for years with no Christmas. Well, when Edmund comes in, he meets the White Witch, and she convinces him that she's okay and gives him some magic food that makes him want to come back to her. Well, she convinces him also that he should bring all his siblings in and bring them to her so that he can then rule over them. They all eventually make it to Narnia and find that Mr. Tumnus has been taken by the White Witch. They also meet the beavers who take care of them, but while they're there with the beavers, Edmund sneaks off and goes to the witch. Not good. Well, he learns very quickly that the witch had been fooling him the whole time. She did not mean to do any of those things, even giving him treats. So she takes off after Edmund's other siblings. They rush to go meet the true King of Narnia, Aslan, at the stone table. Aslan is a great and powerful lion. He rules justly and is finally back after many years of being gone. On their way to the stone table, a few things happen. The three siblings and the beavers run into none other than Santa Claus. He gives them some presents, and finally we notice that the queen's spell is breaking. Christmas has come. They receive presents. Peter gets a shield and a sword. Susan gets a bow and arrow and a horn. And little Lucy gets a potion that will heal anyone and a dagger. Well, Edmund is having the opposite of a good time, being dragged around through the freezing cold with no coat on, with the White Witch in her sledge. Well, it's starting to thaw. The winter is going away. It's getting warmer, and all the snow is melting. So, the sled can't go on any further without snow, can it? They take the rest of the way on foot. And by the time that they're taking a walk, Peter, Lucy, and Susan, as well as the beavers, have made it to the stone table and met Aslan. They meet him, and he shows Peter Cair Paravel, where he and his siblings will rule Narnia. Also, the wolves who work for the witch have caught up with them and try to attack Susan. Peter defeats him, but one of them gets away, and I think we will see what happens to that one next. Aslan sends some people after that wolf, hoping to get Edmund back from the witch. All right, let's see what happens in our next chapters of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Enjoy!
Chapter 13, Deep Magic from the Dawn of Time. Now, we must get back to Edmund. When he had been made to walk far further than he had ever known that anybody could walk, the witch at last halted in a dark valley all overshadowed with fir trees and yew trees. Edmund simply sank down and lay on his face, doing nothing at all, and not even caring what was going to happen next, provided they would let him lie still. He was too tired even to notice how hungry and thirsty he was. The witch and the dwarf were talking close beside him in low tones.
"No," said the dwarf. "It is no use now, O Queen. They must have reached the stone table by now."
"Perhaps the wolf will smell us out and bring us news," said
said the witch.
It cannot be good news if he does, said the dwarf.
4 thrones in Cair Paravel, said the witch. How if only 3 were filled? That would not fulfill the prophecy.
What difference would it make now that he is here?
Said the dwarf. He did not dare, even now, to mention the name of Aslan to his mistress. He may not stay long, and then we would fall upon the 3 at Cair.
Yet it might be better, said the dwarf, to keep this one,
here he kicked Edmund,
for bargaining with.
Yes, and have him rescued, said the witch scornfully.
Then, said the dwarf, we had better do what we have to do at once.
I would like to have it done on the stone table itself, said the witch. That is the proper place, and that is where it has always been done before.
It will be a long time now before the stone table can again be put in its proper use, said the dwarf.
True, said the witch. Then, well, I will begin. At that moment, with a rush and a snarl, a wolf rushed up to them.
I have seen them. They're all at the stone table with him. They have killed my Captain Morgrim. I was hidden in the darkness and saw it all. One of the sons of Adam's killed him. Fly, fly!
No, said the witch. There is no need for flying. Go quickly. Summon all our people to meet me here as speedily as they can. Call out the giants and the werewolves and the spirits of those trees who are on our side. Call the ghouls and the bogles, the ogres and the minotaurs. Call the cruels, the hags, the spectres, and the people of the toadstools. We will fight. What? Have I not still my wand? Will not their ranks turn into stone even as they come on? Be off quickly. I have a little thing to finish here while you are away. The great brute bowed his head, turned, and galloped away. Now, said she, we have no table. Let me see. We had better put it against the trunk of the tree. Edmund found himself being roughly forced to his feet. Then the dwarf set him with his back against a tree and bound him fast. He saw the witch take off her outer mantle. Her arms were bare underneath it and terribly white. Because they were so very white, he could see them, but he could not see much else. It was so dark in the valley underneath the dark trees. Prepare the victim, said the witch, and the dwarf undid Edmund's collar and folded back his shirt at the neck. Then he took Edmund's hair and pulled his head back so that he had to raise his chin. After that, Edmund heard a strange noise. Fss, fss, fss. For a moment he couldn't think of what it was. Then he realized it was the sound of a knife being sharpened. At that very moment he heard loud shouts from every direction, a drumming of hooves and a beating of wings, a scream from the witch, confusion all around him. And then he found he was being untied. Strong arms were round him, and he heard big, kind voices saying things like, "Let him lie down. Give him some wine. Drink this. Steady now. You'll be all right in a minute." Then he heard the voices of people who were not talking to him to one another. And they were saying things like, "Who's got the witch? I thought you had a... I didn't see her after I knocked the knife out of her hand. I was after the dwarf. Do you mean to say she's escaped?" "A chap can't mind everything at once. What's that?" "Oh, sorry, it's only an old stamp." But just at this point, Edmund went off in a dead faint. Presently, the centaurs and unicorns and deer and birds, they were of course the rescue party, which Aslan had sent in the last chapter, all set off to go back to the stone table, carrying Edmund with them. But if they could have seen what happened in that valley after they'd gone, I think they might have been surprised. It was perfectly still, and presently the moon grew bright. If you had been there, you would have seen the moonlight shining on an old tree stump and a fair-sized boulder. But if you had gone on looking, you would gradually have begun to think that there was something odd about both the stump and the boulder. And next, you would have thought that the stump did look really remarkably like a little fat man crouching on the ground, And if you had watched long enough, you would have seen the stump walk across to the boulder, and the boulder sit up and begin talking to the stump. For in reality, the stump and the boulder were simply the witch and the dwarf. For it was part of her magic that she could make things look like what they weren't. And she had the presence of mind to do so at the very moment when the knife was knocked out of her hand. She had kept hold of her wand, so it had been kept safe too. When the other children woke up next morning, they had been sleeping on piles of cushions in the pavilion. The first thing they heard from Mrs. Beaver was that their brother had been rescued and brought into camp late last night, and at that moment was with Aslan. As soon as they had breakfast, they all went out, and there they saw Aslan and Edmund walking together in the dewy grass, apart from the rest of the court. There was no need to tell you, and no one ever heard, what Aslan was saying, but it was a conversation which Edmund never forgot. As the others drew nearer, Aslan turned to meet them, bringing Edmund with him.
"Here is your brother," he said, "and there is no need to talk to him about what is past."
Edmund shook hands with the others and said to each of them in turn, "I'm sorry," and everyone said, "That's all right." And then everyone wanted very hard to say something which would make it quite clear that they were all friends with him again, something ordinary and natural. And of course, no one could think of anything in the world to say. But before they had time to feel really awkward, one of the leopards approached Aslan and said,
"Sire, there is a messenger from the enemy who craves audience."
"Let him approach,"
said Aslan. The leopard went away and soon returned leading the witch's dwarf.
"What is your message, son of Earth?"
asked Aslan. "The Queen of Narnia and Empress of the Lone Islands desires a safe conduct to come and speak with you," said the dwarf, "on a matter which is much to your advantage as hers." "Queen of Narnia, indeed," said Mr. Beaver. "Of course all the cheek—"
"Peace, Beaver,"
said Aslan.
"All names will soon be restored to their proper owners. In the meantime, we will not dispute about them. Tell your mistress, son of Earth, that I grant her safe conduct on condition she leaves her wand behind her at the great oak." This was agreed to, and 2 leopards went back with the dwarf to see that the conditions were properly carried out.
"But supposing she turns the 2 leopards into stone?"
whispered Lucy to Peter. I think the same idea had occurred to the leopards themselves. At any rate, as they walked off, their fur was all standing up on their backs, and their tails were bristling, like a cat's when it sees a strange dog. "It'll be all right," whispered Peter in reply. "He wouldn't send them if it weren't." A few minutes later, the witch herself walked out onto the top of the hill and came straight across and stood before Aslan. The 3 children who had not seen her before felt shudders running down their backs at the sight of her face. There were low growls among the animals present. Though it was bright sunshine, everyone felt suddenly cold. The only 2 people present who seemed to be quite at ease were Aslan and the witch herself. It was the oddest thing to see those 2 faces, the golden face and the dead white face, so close together. Not that the witch looked Aslan exactly in his eyes. Mrs. Beaver particularly noticed this.
"You have a traitor there, Aslan,"
said the witch. Of course, everyone present knew that she meant Edmund, but Edmund had got past thinking about himself after all he'd been through, and after the talk he'd had that morning. He just went on looking at Aslan. It didn't seem to matter what the witch said.
"Well,"
said Aslan,
"his offense is not against you."
"Have you forgotten the deep
magic?" asked the witch.
"Let's say I have forgotten it,"
answered Aslan gravely.
"Tell us of this deep magic."
"Tell you?" said the witch, her voice growing suddenly shriller.
"Tell you what is written on the very table of stone which stands beside us? Tell you what is written in letters deep as a spear as long on the fire stones on the secret hill? Tell you what is engraved on the scepter of the emperor beyond the sea? You at least know the magic which the emperor put into Narnia at the very beginning. You know that every traitor belongs to me as my lawful prey, and that for every treachery I have the right to a kill."
"Oh," said Mr. Beaver, "so that's how you came to imagine yourself a queen, because you were the Emperor's hangman, I see."
Peace, Beaver,
said Aslan, with a very low growl. "And so," continued the witch, "that human creature is mine. His life is forfeit to me. His blood is my property."
"Come and take him then,"
said the bull with a man's head with a great bellowing voice. "Fool!" said the witch with a savage smile that was almost a snarl. "Do you really think your master can rob me of my rights by mere force? He knows the deep magic better than that. He knows that unless I have blood, as the law says, all Narnia will be overturned and perish in fire and water."
"It is very true,"
said Aslan.
"I do not deny it."
"Oh, Aslan!" whispered Susan in the lion's ear. You won't, will you? Can't we do something about the deep magic? Isn't there something you can work against it?"
"Work against the Emperor's magic?"
said Aslan, turning to her with something like a frown on his face, and nobody ever made that suggestion to him again. Edmund was on the other side of Aslan, looking all the time at Aslan's face. He felt a choking feeling and wondered if he ought to say something, but a moment later he felt that he was not expected to do anything except wait and do what he was told.
"Fall back, all of you,"
said Aslan.
"and I will talk to the witch alone."
They all obeyed. It was a terrible time, this, waiting and wondering while the lion and the witch talked earnestly together in low voices. Lucy said, "Oh, Edmund," and began to cry. Peter stood with his back to the others, looking out at the distant sea. The beavers stood holding each other's paws with their heads bowed. The centaurs stamped uneasily with their hooves, but everyone came perfectly still in the end, so that you noticed even small sounds like a bumblebee flying past, or birds in the forest below them. Or even the wind rustling the leaves. And still the talk between Aslan and the White Witch went on. At last they heard Aslan's voice.
"You shall all come back,"
he said.
"I have settled the matter. She has renounced the claim on your brother's blood."
And all over the hill there was a noise, as if everyone had been holding their breath, and now had begun to breathe again, and then a murmur of talk. The witch was just turning away with a look of fierce joy on her face, when she stopped and said, "But how do I know this promise will be kept?" Aslan roared, half rising from his throne, and his great mouth opened wider and wider, and the roar grew louder and louder, and the witch, after staring for a moment with her lips wide apart, picked up her skirts and fairly ran for her life. Chapter 14. The Triumph of the Witch. As soon as the witch had gone, Aslan said,
"We must move from this place at once. It will be wanted for other purposes. We shall encamp tonight at the fords of Burna."
Of course everyone was dying to ask him how he had arranged matters with the witch, but his face was stern, and everyone's ears were still ringing from the sound of his roar, so nobody dared. After a meal, which was taken in the open air on the hilltop, for the sun had got strong by now and dried the grass, they were busy for a while, taking the pavilion down and packing things up. Before 2 o'clock they were on the march, and set off in a northeasterly direction, walking at an easy pace, for they had not far to go. During the first part of the journey, Aslan explained to Peter his plan of campaign.
"As soon as she has finished her business in these parts,"
he said,
"the witch and her crew will almost certainly fall back to her house and prepare for a siege. You may or may not be able to cut her off and prevent her from reaching it."
He then went on to outline 2 plans of battle, one for fighting the witch and her people in the wood, and another for assaulting her castle. and all the time he was advising Peter how to conduct the operations, saying things like,
"You must put your centaurs in such a place," or "You must post scouts to see that she does not do so and so."
till at last Peter said, "But you'll be there yourself, Aslan."
"I can give no promise of that,"
answered the lion, and he continued giving Peter his instructions. For the last part of the journey, it was Susan and Lucy who saw most of him. He did not talk very much and seemed to them to be sad. It was still afternoon when they came down to a place where the river valley had widened out and the river was broad and shallow. This was the fords of Berna, and Aslan gave orders to halt on this side of the water. But Peter said, "Wouldn't it be better to camp on the far side, for fear she should try a night attack for anything?" Aslan, who seemed to have been thinking about something else, roused himself with a shake of his magnificent mane and said,
What's that?"
Peter said it all over again.
"No,"
said Aslan in a dull voice, as if it didn't matter.
"No, she will not make an attack tonight."
And then he sighed deeply, but presently he added,
"All the same, it was well thought of. That is how a soldier ought to think. But it doesn't really matter."
So they proceeded to pitch their camp. Aslan's mood affected everyone that evening. Peter was feeling uncomfortable, too, at the idea of fighting the battle on his own. The news that Aslan might not be there had come to a great shock to him. Supper that evening was a quiet meal. Everyone felt how different it had been last night, or even that morning. It was as if the good times, having just begun, were already drawing to their end. This feeling affected Susan so much that she couldn't get to sleep when she went to bed. And after she had lain counting sheep and turning over and over, she heard Lucy give a long sigh and turned over just beside her in the darkness. "Can't you sleep either?" said Susan. "No," said Lucy. "I thought you were asleep." "I say, Susan." "What?" "I have the most horrible feeling, as if something were hanging over us." "Have you? Because as a matter of fact, so have I," said Susan. "Something about Aslan," said Lucy. "Either some dreadful thing is going to happen to him, or something dreadful that he's going to do." "There's been something wrong with him all afternoon," said Susan. "Lucy, what was that he said about not coming with us to the battle? You don't think he could be stealing away and leaving us tonight, do you?" "Where is he now?" said Lucy. "Is he here in the pavilion?" "I don't think so." "Susan, let's go outside and have a look around. We might see him." "All right, let's," said Susan. "We might just as well be doing that as lying awake here." Very quietly, the two girls groped their way out among the other sleepers and crept out of the tent. The moonlight was bright, and everything was quite still except for the noise of the river chattering over the stones. And then Susan suddenly caught Lucy's arm and said, "Look!" On the far side of the camping ground, just where the trees began, they saw the lion slowly walking away from them into the wood. Without a word, they both followed him. He led them up the steep slope out of the river valley and then slightly to the right, apparently by the very same route which they had used that afternoon in coming from the hill of the stone table. On and on he led them, into dark shadows and out into pale moonlight, getting their feet wet with heavy dew. His tail and his head hung low, and he walked slowly as if he were very, very tired. Then, when they were crossing a wide open place where there were no shadows for them to hide in, he stopped and looked around. It was no good trying to run away, so they came toward him. When they came closer, he said,
"Oh, children, children, why are you following me?"
"We couldn't sleep," said Lucy, and then felt as sure as she needed to say no more, and that Aslan knew what they had been thinking. "Please, may we come with you, wherever you're going?" asked Susan.
"Well,"
said Aslan, and seemed to be thinking. Then he said,
"I would be glad of company tonight. Yes, you may come, if you will promise to stop when I tell you, and after that leave me to go on alone."
"Oh, thank you, we will," said the two girls. Forward they went again, and one of the girls walked on each side of the lion. But how slowly he walked, and his great royal head drooped so that his nose nearly touched the grass. Presently he stumbled and gave a low moan. "Aslan, dear Aslan," said Lucy, "what is wrong? Can you tell us?" "Are you ill, dear Aslan?" asked Susan.
"No," said Aslan. "I am sad and lonely. Lay your hands on my mane so that I can feel you are there, and let us walk like that."
So the girls did what they would never have dared to do without his permission, but what they had longed to do ever since they first saw him, buried their cold hands in the beautiful sea of fur and stroked it, and so doing walked with him. And presently they saw that they were going with him up the slope of the hill on which the stone table stood. They went up the side where the trees came furthest up, and when they got to the last tree, it was one that had some bushes about it, Aslan stopped and said,
"O children, children, here you must stop, and whatever happens, do not let yourselves be seen. Farewell."
And both girls cried bitterly, though they hardly knew why, and clung to the lion and kissed his mane and his nose and his paws and his great sad eyes. Then he turned from them and walked out to the top of the hill, and Lucy and Susan, crouching in the bushes, looked after him, and this is what they saw. A great crowd of people were standing all around the stone table, and though the moon was shining, many of them carried torches which burned with evil-looking red flames and black smoke. But such people, ogres with monstrous teeth, wolves and bull-headed men, spirits of evil trees and poisonous plants, and other creatures whom I wouldn't describe, because if I did, the grown-ups would probably not let you read this book. Cruels and hags, and incubuses, wraiths, horrors, efreets, sprites, ornkeys, woozes, and etnits. In fact, here were all those who were on the witch's side, and whom the wolf had summoned at her command. And right in the middle, standing by the table, was the witch herself. A howl and a gibber of dismay went up from the creatures when they saw the great lion pacing toward them. And for a moment, even the witch herself seemed struck with fear. Then she recovered herself and gave a wild, fierce laugh. "The fool!" she cried. "The fool has come! Bind him fast!" Lucy and Susan held their breaths, waiting for Aslan's roar and his spring upon his enemies. But it never came. 4 hags, grinning and leering, yet also, at first, hanging back and half afraid of what they had to do, had approached him. "Bind him, I say!" repeated the White Witch. The hags made a dart at him and shrieked with triumph when they found that he made no resistance at all. Then others, evil dwarves and apes, rushed in to help them, and between them they rolled the huge lion over on his back and tied all 4 of his paws together, shouting and cheering as if they had done something brave. Though, had the lion chosen, one of those paws could have been the death of all of them. But he made no noise, even when the enemy, straining and tugging, pulled the cords so tight that they cut his flesh. Then they began to drag him up to the stone table. "Stop!" said the witch. "Let him first be shaved." Another roar of mean laughter went up from her followers as an ogre with a pair of shears came forward and squatted down by Aslan's head. Snip, snip, snip went the shears, and masses of curling gold began to fall to the ground. When the ogre stood back and the children, watching from their hiding place, could see the face of Aslan looking all small and different without his mane, the enemies also saw the difference. "Why, he's only a great cat after all," cried one. "Is that what we're afraid of?" said another, and they surged around Aslan, jeering at him, saying things like, "Kitty, kitty, poor little cat! And how many mice have you caught today, cat? And would you like a saucer of milk?" "Oh, how can they?" said Lucy, tears streaming down her cheeks. "The brutes, the brutes!" For now that the first shock was over, the shorn face of Aslan looked to her braver and more beautiful and more patient than ever. "Muzzle him," said the witch. And even now, as they worked about his face, putting on the muzzle, one bite from his jaws would have cost 2 or 3 of them their hands. But he never moved, and it seemed to enrage all the rabble. Everyone was at him now. Those who had been afraid to come near him, even after he was bound, began to find their courage. And for a few minutes, the 2 girls could not even see him. So thickly was he surrounded by the whole crowd of creatures, kicking and hitting him, spitting on him and jeering at him. At last the rabble had had enough of this. They began to drag the bound and muzzled lion to the stone table, some pulling and some pushing. He was so huge that even as they got him there, it took all of their efforts to hoist him onto the surface of it. There was more tying and tightening of the cords. "The cowards! The cowards!" sobbed Susan. "Are they still afraid of him, even now?" When once Aslan had been tied, and tied so that he was really a mass of cords, on the flat stone, a hush fell on the crowd. 4 hags holding torches stood at the corners of the table. The witch bared her arms as she had bared them the previous night, and when it had been Edmund instead of Aslan, then she began to whet her knife. It looked to the children, when the gleam of the torchlight fell on it, as if the knife were made of stone, not steel. And it was strange and evil-shaped. At last she grew near. She stood by Aslan's head. Her face was working and twitching with passion, but he looked up to the sky, still quiet, neither angry nor afraid, but a little sad. Then, just before she gave the blow, she stooped down and said in a quivering voice, "And now who has won? Fool, did you think that by all this you would save the human traitor? Now I will kill you instead of him, as our pact was so the deep magic will be appeased. But when you are dead, what will prevent me from killing him as well? And who will take him out of my hand then? Understand that you have given me Narnia forever. You have lost your own life, and you have not saved his. In that knowledge, despair and die." The children did not see the actual moment of the killing. They couldn't bear to look and had covered their eyes. That was quite a sad place to end our chapters for now, but we will see what happens next in our next video. Before we get on to that though, let's do a little discussion about what has happened in our chapters. So, chapter 13 was titled Deep Magic from the Dawn of Time. What did the dwarf suggest to the witch what they should do with Edmund? He kind of implied it, but what did he do? The dwarf thinks that they should get rid of him, meaning like kill Edmund. Ugh. But what did the witch intend to do with him instead? Use him as a bargaining tool. So a bargaining tool is, I'll give you this if you give me that, right? So she wants something in return if she gets Edmund back to them. How did the witch and the dwarf avoid being captured when Edmund was rescued? The witch has some sneaky magic, doesn't she? She can disguise herself and others into different things. What do you remember what they disguised themselves as? A stump and a rock. They said if you look really closely, you could tell there was something weird, but it was dark, they were hurrying, they wanted to get Edmund back and make sure he was okay, so they just thought that the dwarf and the witch disappeared. What did Aslan say when he brought Edmund back to his siblings?
What did he say to them? You remember? That there's no need to talk about what is in the past. Edmund apologized to Aslan, and then he apologized to all his siblings, and they wanted to make sure he knew that they were friends still too. How did the witch's appearance affect the group of Aslan's supporters? So, it was a very big difference, wasn't it? The witch is all white and very pale. And how did it make everybody feel? Cold. Even though the sun was out, it's bright and a beautiful day, they felt that winter chill that she brings. Mrs. Beaver noticed something about the meeting between Aslan and the witch. Do you remember what it was? She noticed that the witch never quite looked Aslan in the eyes. She is scared of him. With good reason. He's pretty powerful. And she is the fake queen and is in the wrong. But why did the witch come? Why did the witch come? Now, thinking back, do you remember what our title of our chapter is? Deep Magic from the Dawn of Time. She asked him, have you forgotten about the deep magic? Apparently, all traitors belong to the witch, and she considers Edmund a traitor because he tried turning in his siblings. So she wanted Edmund. But what did Aslan do? He said, let's talk this over. See if we can come to an arrangement. So he and the witch talk it out. All right. There's a few thinking questions. Let's do those real quick. What do you think of the way that the rescuers treated Edmund? Do you remember what they said? They were all very gentle and wanted to make sure he was okay and said, you'll be all right, don't worry. We're here to help you. They had never met him, and literally all they probably heard about him was that he had went to the witch on his own accord and was going to give up his siblings. So what I think that just shows already how Aslan is going to treat him, which is forgiveness. And saying, you know what, we're going to move forward. You've seen your mistake. It's all good. Why do you think Aslan told Mr. Beaver to keep quiet? He was going to make it worse, wasn't he? He just kept saying things that came to his mind. And none of them were very helpful. So he wanted Mr. Beaver not to make things worse. Aslan probably already had a plan because he was there when the deep magic was created, right? So he had a plan. He wanted Mr. Beaver to just let us talk. We're going to make this work. All right, let's talk about chapter 14, which was titled, and this title made me a little sad, right? But when I turned the page, it was called The Triumph of the Witch. So first off, what's a triumph? It's a victory, or you've won. You have won a battle, or you won a game. You've triumphed. And if it's for the witch, that's not a good thing. Why did Aslan say that they needed to move their camp? He said that there was going to be another use for the stone table.
and so they needed to move and be able to cut off the queen's people when they're headed back to her keep. What did Aslan say about his presence in the battle that was sure to come? What did he tell Peter? He told him he probably wouldn't be there, and so he was giving Peter all kinds of instructions on how to run the battle, because he wasn't going to be there. What did the girls see when they got up in the middle of the night? Aslan was leaving. He was going back from where they came from, right? Strange. What did Aslan say when they asked to go with him? What did you expect him to say? I expected him to say, "Get back to bed, what are you doing?" But he said, "It'd be nice to have some company, but you have to stop when I tell you to. So I gotta be able to go on at a certain point." How did the witch's followers react when Aslan appeared at the stone table? At first, they were all pretty scared, weren't they? A little standoffish. The witch told them to go and tie him up. And they're like, "I'm not getting close to that scary lion." But did Aslan fight back? He did not. He let them do it. He let them do it. What was done to Aslan before he was put on the stone table? All of the witches' people were not nice to him. They cut off his mane, they kicked him, they said mean words, they did a lot of awful stuff. They're not good people. And then, what did the witch do on the stone table? She killed Aslan. What? This is nuts. So one more question about this pretty sad chapter. Why do you think Aslan didn't tell anyone what was going to happen? He had been acting sad all day. He clearly knew where he was needing to go that evening, so this wasn't a surprise to Aslan, was it? He knew what was going on. Why do you think he didn't tell any of his followers? Because they probably would have stopped him, right? Well, he's their king. He's someone they look up to and follow and listen to. So they don't want him to get hurt. And they don't want the witch to win, to triumph. That's not good, is it? So that's what I think. He didn't want them to know because they would have tried to stop him or gone with him and fought all the witch's people. And I have a feeling Aslan had a plan. All right? So remember that. I think Aslan has a plan. And I'm pretty sure we will find it out in our next chapter. So I will see you with our next video about The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as we continue our story by C.S. Lewis. Bye, everyone.